All right, thank you. Well, good evening. Welcome all to Happy New Year. Welcome all to the GPC meeting for January 2nd, 2024. We'll start off as normal. We have a new member of our team. Jane Evelyn has joined us, and we'll start off as with the introductions of members, and no guests in the field, but members. So Dan Saunders.
Paul Hogan.
Jane Evelyn.
Mary Beth Gilbert.
Liz Johnson.
All right. And then out in TV land, we have Galen.
Galen Widely.
Excellent. How you doing, Galen?
A little bit better, but still under the weather.
Oh, sorry to hear that. I hope you feel better.
Thank you.
Okay. I just printed this off. We don't have copies. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So for our meeting, the first on the agenda is the review of minutes from December 13th, which I actually didn't enter those in as minutes, so I will do that for our next meeting, and I'll be based on the email that I had sent to Lori.
Great.
So now we have to elect our GPC chairperson, vice chair, and secretary. It's what we do when we have our first meeting, which we didn't necessarily do that in December.
We had COVID.
So we need to do so. So I'll entertain motions for those, and if you're not here, you can be elected.
Especially if you're not here.
So,
Will you serve again as chair?
yes.
Then I nominate you.
Second.
Yeah.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Passes. Thank you.
What do we need?
The vice chair. So basically, those duties are to fill in if the chair is not available, which has been less because we were able to do it remotely as well.
Yeah.
We couldn't do it previously, so.
Who was?
Anyone interested in being the vice chair?
I nominate Paul.
Paul?
I'll accept.
All right. I'll second the
It's
nomination.
easier than secretary.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye. Okay, Paul. And then, no, here's the one that's the hard work, right? The secretary. So, anyone interested in doing that? Or maybe sharing the responsibility. We don't necessarily have to have somebody do it all the time. I did it for a lot of years. It can be tedious at times, for sure. And Janet did a great job of putting very summer, so unfortunately. And I'd like to thank Janet again. I did mention that in December, but I'd like to thank Janet again for her years of service to our board and being a key member of getting our
Yeah, for sure.
comprehensive plan passed for 2022.
I guess I have a question on the minutes
Yes.
to make the job less challenging. There's two kinds of minutes.
Yeah.
One minutes where everybody, anything that's said sort of gets written down.
Yeah.
Whether or not there's a vote related to it or, just getting us to wherever we're getting to.
Yeah.
Versus the minutes that say, this was our agenda and this is what we did on item 1 was this and we voted to do this.
Yeah.
And it was proposed by so-and-so, seconded, which is a much easier
Right.
approach.
Those can be our minutes, because our minutes aren't going to be like the planning boards or the board of selectmen
Right.
that could end up in court and be part of a legal proceeding and so forth. They're more general. The important piece is really to kind of capture if there are motions made.
Right.
Especially around, like, one of the key ones that we always have to vote on is whether or not a land use ordinance change is consistent with the plan, and that's important. So we want to make sure we always capture things like that in the minutes. But like Janet used to do, it was pretty, sort of a generic kind of coverage of the topic.
I can do that if it's that
Yeah,
simple.
it could be one
simple
pagers,
way.
really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do transcripts here, so if you want a copy of the transcripts, I can
Oh.
send it on to you.
Oh, nice.
That's awesome.
Just let me get an email after.
Okay.
Which is quicker than having to watch it again.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. All right, well,
I'll make the motion.
Second.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Thank
All
you.
right,
Thanks.
excellent. Thank you very much, Liz.
Does it start today?
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately,
All right, so next up is a continued discussion of the proposed land use ordinances changes. So that was the definitions, the residential parking standards, dwellings, and affordable housing density. At the previous meeting, we discussed making changes to the affordable housing density. I don't have a copy of any changes that were made. I haven't seen
So
one.
the consultant didn't come back with the.
So
he was good.
that would be the question. So
Yeah.
Galen, did Lee J come back with, I think it was the water runoff?
The water runoff was
Yeah.
the one he was going to redraft.
He was going to redraft. Did you get anything back from Lee J, Galen?
I did not get anything on the runoff. I know he made the correction to the parking spaces that you made at the last meeting, but I haven't seen anything on the on specifically the water runoff.
Okay. He had taken an action to go back and do that. Is it okay for you to reach back out to him? I know he couldn't make our meeting this evening. I think that's important for us to get our eyes on.
Yeah, I was hopeful for that. It was the stormwater management for any property that adds an ADU as a detached building.
Right.
Right, because you're already covered by well, you're not necessarily covered, but you're not changing your home. The second piece was the sort of the building or performance standards around that detached to be consistent with the home requirements for an ADU, right? And how that would look. So there were two pieces, Galen, to that, changes that he was going to make to that section.
So are
Yeah, let me.
This was
Um,
with
what are we looking at now? Is this the,
oh yeah, sorry to bring up the speed. So this is all associated with the LD 2003 regulation that was
Right.
approved by the Maine legislature.
so are we looking at the town code at this point?
Yeah, so the town's codes and changes that needed to be made to that code to comply with the LD 2003.
Right,
And the first one, we had actually changed last June 2023
For accessory dwelling
for
units.
accessory dwelling units to add the detached building piece.
okay, so those changes
Yeah.
have been made.
So those changes have been
That was
made.
in there already. We
So
had
that was made.
anticipated that.
So we covered that, but then Paul picked up a couple inconsistencies between the accessory dwelling within.
Parking was inconsistent. The
Parking,
parking requirements
Right,
yeah.
had to be fixed.
Right. It brought up a concern of stormwater management coming off the property if you add another building onto that property, because you can have a detached accessory dwelling unit now, which we previously didn't allow, but as required by the standard, by the regulation.
Could we just run through?
I think Ian wants to say something.
Okay,
Yeah, he had the design standards into the ADU component,
okay.
and he did a section H, which is about the stormwater runoff requirements. So I do have updated. Do you want me to forward that to you?
Can you share it on the
Yeah.
screen?
Let me
Or-
see if I.
have to put it on
I'm
until-
disabled from
Hold
screen
on.
share.
Give me a second.
so when I look online, I don't see all the chapters in here,
You'll, so,
All right, try now. Can you share?
because they sometimes
can.
they're there, but like chapter 2 through 4.
There you go.
Okay, here's what I have.
Yeah, that's going to be really hard for us.
oh yeah, we can't see that.
Yeah, I think it would be better just to send it, and then we can talk about it the next meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That way we can look over. But could we spend some time on ADUs and just sort of run through the buckets? I just want to get really clear in my mind. So I have like 5 things I listed as concerns that I have, that I want to make sure that we can articulate to the community
Yep.
about what these changes do and mean. And first and foremost, we need to understand.
James is part of his board, isn't he?
Yes,
All right, I'm promoting him over.
great.
So for example, so not in any type of order in terms of importance, but, we did talk about, we want to make sure a historical look and feel to the port. Somehow we understand how, each 3 of these buckets have the potential to change it, and we should discuss that. The water runoff, what we need to do to make sure abutting and neighbors are protected, parking, impacts to traffic, and then the impacts to the waste, potential impacts to the waste does it in a waste treatment plant. What I mean by that is this going to go above and beyond our normal growth outlook of permitting buildings, right? And so I want to sort of just think about those types of 5 buckets as we go back through, because when we go back to the select board and most importantly to the residents, we're going to be able to articulate this stuff and paint a picture for them. And I know when you and I had spoke with
Yeah.
Lori in our meeting, she was going to have somebody pull the GIS, look at the GIS maps and then be able to define sections of the towns and
Right.
then what would be relevant to each section.
Yeah, I mean, from the ADU piece, I mean, it's already in the ordinance, the changes that are required. And the piece that we were having, Lee J make some modifications to are actually, I would say, really weren't part of the LD
Right.
2003. They were more general to, hey, let's make sure that, this detached building has some consistency with the main building, and then we added the stormwater management piece,
Right.
right? It's the other 2 big ones, right? It's the affordable housing density and the 2 or 4 units
Yeah.
that are not related to affordable housing specifically.
So
But
could we use this as a warm-up exercise for me then? Because it might be easy. And let me just run through some of the questions I have, and just so that we can get our hands around the ADUs.
Okay,
And just, it may be easy peasy, but I think it would help. So for example,
Can I just say one thing?
Yep.
The state calls them accessory dwelling units, but
Yes.
in our code, they're called accessory apartments,
yes,
correct?
yeah.
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So we're not using the term ADU, even though that's in the state
Yeah.
legislation.
That's a good point.
So then, like, for the first one,
That
I would
confused me.
write, if I filled in my little cheat sheet here, I would say, in LD 2003, to Paul's point, ADUs is discussed, and then it says, my first question, are any of this covered in Kennebunkport ordinance? And we said, yes, they would be under the accessory apartment
Yep.
section of our
Our
town
Yep,
code.
ordinance.
And then it was important for us, I think, when we talked with Lee J, and I want to make sure that we all understood this because it goes to the other questions. So for the ADUs, or as we use them as accessory apartments, they're applicable in all 3 areas, the transition area, the growth area, and the rural area. Okay, so that's a yes. And then any changes to the current, so per LD 2003, any changes to the current town lot building setback ordinances, and that, so if I go through the LD 2003, for ADUs, it says, you can't make anything on lane, the primary building sets the codes for setback, and then there's really no restrictions on lot size that we can impose. We could not, so in growth, transition, and rural, there are no lot coverage parameters that would stop somebody from putting on an ADU. There's
Other than side yard setbacks.
other than the setbacks, and what we might be putting in for water containment, for water runoff containment, meaning that they
Right.
might need a portion of their land to do that, so it may or may not impact the size of the ADU.
If he's adding a new building.
Okay,
Is there a thing about 20% lot coverage with the ADUs?
no.
That's only with an additional.
Yeah, so that's because what I read through the law, and I think what Lee J said to us, is it's purely setbacks. And anything to do, any ordinances with lot coverage or required lot sizes are not applicable to ADUs.
So here's a question. I have a non-conforming lot, meaning when zoning came in, they put it at 40,000 square feet, and my lot is only 3/4 of an acre or a half an acre. And I have used my lot coverage so far, and I want to put in, and I'm not in a shoreland zone. If it's in the shoreland zone, there's a special rule. So can I still, if I have the room in my side yard, I can, even though I'm non-conforming now, this is for our expert on the phone, can I still add one? An ADU, detached ADU, or interior ADU?
Yes, you can do an ADU. It doesn't go off density, residential density. As long as you're meeting the setbacks.
Okay, so even though it's non-conforming, and,
And there's a primary structure on the property.
right,
So I just need to test that. So Galen,
go ahead.
the house is non-conforming, so, it's on a non-conforming lot size. And now, not only is there a house on a non-conforming lot, but we can now also, by this law, required to allow an ADU of a certain size to be built as long as it meets the setback. Galen?
That's correct. I'm going to pull up the section. As long as there's a principal structure on the property,
Yeah,
we can't.
but I think this is where the question comes in, because you've got to, when we read through the ADU section, there was nothing that said anything, it assumed everything was per code, not that you had a nonconformance. So there was nothing listed in the LD 2003 that said anything about nonconformance, which is, so you can see why we're asking this question is because that really changes look and feel, right? If you got a house on a nonconforming lot, sitting next to another one on a nonconforming lot, and now you're allowing both of those to have ADUs as long as they meet the setback, this really is, specifically in our growth area, is going to change the look and feel. Big
Can
time.
you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Hey, I just want to add something. When we have like new construction and stuff like that, I think it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's still in there. We have that, portion in there that says like you can't, you can only build on a certain percentage of it. So if we're being stricter than what this is suggesting, and is this what they're alluding to, that we can't allow for that anymore?
That's correct.
Well, I think their concept is you can't make the rules any tougher than for a single-family dwelling, if that's the lot we're talking about. So
Right,
whatever.
but in your example, Paul, which I agree, if you have a small, even if it's a non-conforming lot, or you have a small lot, and you've already put on that particular percentage, where would you even have room to put it? I don't know. I'm struggling with that.
Well, I think
Yeah, I mean, I got the copy of what it says in the regulation. It says at least one accessory dwelling unit must be allowed on any lot where single-family dwelling units in principle. Oop, wrong spot, sorry. A municipality shall exempt any accessory dwelling unit from any density requirements or calculations related to the area in which the accessory dwelling unit is constructed.
Okay, so they're saying one. They're calling out one.
Robin has raised her hand when you get a movement.
Okay.
Dan, they're calling out one. One is allowed.
yes.
If more than one accessory dwelling unit has been constructed on a lot as a result of the allowances under this section or section 4364-A, the lot is not eligible for any additional increases in density except as allowed by the municipality. So whatever we decide is what I take.
Right. So, but LD, this is saying that if there's not an accessory dwelling, only one is allowed, no more than one.
Correct.
That's
Okay.
what they're
all right.
requiring, but we could allow more, is what I read there,
Correct.
okay? But we can't take into, they're excluded, the accessory dwelling unit is excluded from lot coverage calculation.
Density.
So I think, Galen, if we could just go back with Lee J and just really nail out that non-conforming part, because I think that's an important point here.
It's silent on that. I haven't
Yeah,
read anything on
no.
it about nonconforming. My
Yeah.
guess is they don't care.
Well, everything's written as if everything is conforming. I think it's a valid question.
But-
It's one
oh, it's a
we're
valid
gonna.
question, for sure.
Yeah, it's one that we should haven't,
Yeah.
so I think Lee J could
Yep.
help us out here, just to, because I'm sure he's going through this with other towns too. My other question on the ADU part was, All right, so we had the nonconformance. So an ADU does not have a certain, a different title or tax number,
Right.
okay?
And it can't be sold independently.
Because it's part of the same
Part of it,
title.
right.
All right, so it can't be,
It can't be made condo. I think the statute's clear on that.
and the accessory apartment, as we have it in the current codes, and what we are foreseeing in the change, is that these cannot be, the accessory apartment cannot be a short-term rental.
That's correct.
Yep.
Okay. Someone could move into their ADU and rent out their house if they were in, but the accessory apartment itself cannot be listed
Yeah, and
for
I
a
think we say you
short-term
gotta live in there for 6 months, so you just can't move in there for a week and move out,
rental. Okay.
right? I mean, it's,
But
the
wait,
idea is for it to
that's
be.
allowed?
Well, the idea is for it to be housing that's affordable. That's one of the reasons why we added the ADU, the accessory
Right,
department.
but if the owner moves in because all their kids have gone off to college and
Right.
gone, then they can rent out their bigger main house
Right.
weekly?
Well,
Sure.
if they're in, so let's use Goose Rocks Beach, because it's an easy one, because there's no limit. So somebody at Goose Rocks Beach, they have an accessory apartment, they could move into their accessory apartment for 6 months, right? And then they could rent out their house, because they're out of the zone for licenses.
Yeah,
It
in
would
fact-
be a different thing if somebody was in the licensing zone, like in the Port or Cape Porpoise, any place out of the beach. Yeah.
Or the inverse can happen where an older couple can move into the apartment and, but their younger family live in the community,
Right,
in the house.
right,
Absolutely.
okay.
So,
Yeah, but
can
that's
I
not a
pipe-
short
we have a question from a resident.
Yeah, Robin,
Robin?
stand by. Okay, I asked her to unmute. All right,
Hi, Robin.
no,
Robin, you there?
all right.
Okay, we'll take her later if she comes back.
Okay, so then my last one is do the accessory apartments, if you're building new, so it's not within the house, and you're building a new construction, so new footprint, hook up to sewer or septic or whatever, is that one of the 40 permits, building permits currently allowed?
Now, I think by LD 2003, we can't require a growth permit for those. And we also don't require it within our accessory apartment
So we don't,
standard. So they
okay,
don't have to get
So just
they have to get a
one
building
is a lot.
permit, but they don't have to get a growth permit.
say that again, Dan?
They have to get a building permit,
Yeah,
but they don't have to get one of the growth permits for that area,
For the accessory.
for the accessory
Right.
apartment.
okay, so then I guess maybe I need a definition check. So, when I called today, we issue like 40 permits a year for new construction.
Right.
So 20 out of growth, 12 out of transition, and 8 out of rural.
Right.
So does the accessory dwelling apartment use,
Now, they're exempt from having to get a growth permit.
oh, so those are growth permits, not
Right, they're
building
not building
permits?
permits.
Okay, so that's
They
what
still got to go through that process.
okay, so that's a growth
That's a
permit.
growth permit. That's just, you have to get a growth permit.
And we limit them at
Construct.
40 right now.
Right.
Okay. So that was just a general question that I'd like either Galen or if we need to go back to Lee J answer, just across all the avenues here. So, for example, what isn't clear in any of the words of LD 2003 is, does this require towns now to open up expand the aperture about how many growth permits can be pulled, or can we hold?
We could still hold. I saw an earlier version when I was trying to find the current version, LD 2003.
Right.
An earlier version had, the elimination of growth permits. But that got removed at some point.
Okay,
And our comprehensive plan was submitted to the state and approved with the reference that we use growth permits in this town to manage our growth. That's how we are trying to manage it so that we can stay in front of it with the infrastructure and all the rest. And so we've got our growth permit set at 40, so 20 allocated to the growth area, 12 to transition, and 8 to rural. And
So-
it's based on, it never dropped below 40, and it's based on the average number of total permits issued over the last 10 years. And that gets, so if we were to hit 40 every time, it goes to 110% of that number. So you'd move up to 44. And then you would, slowly you could increase.
Okay, so a couple things on this one then. The accessory apartments then, so now I'm going towards the wastewater treatment cutoff, right? So I asked, and it was, with a couple board members, we were forwarded a 2019 study of the capacity. And then, so I'm, reading through that now. But then also, I'm going to take a little tour with Chris and Eric, just to familiarize.
Yeah, cool.
But roughly right, it looks like we do have a cap limit that we'll eventually migrate to. So I think the thing in terms of the 40 permits is okay for growth. My problem is the ADUs. And I know right now that we're really not using the accessory apartments. There's not like a big run. But I think 2003 coming to vote, LD 2003 coming to vote and stuff is going to sort of open the aperture of awareness.
Yeah.
Sure, over
And,
time, yeah.
and people might pick. And so now this is going to be, that somehow has to be, somehow we've got to figure out an equation for that, and the impact. So for example, when you said, well, if we get to this point, we might update, do 110 and increase, I would say we would want to actually hold the growth permits until we get a control on, what the impact of any of the accessory apartments.
What's our sewer capacity?
So don't quote me.
Yeah, just
Because
the-
I'm,
Yeah.
so back in 2019, it looked like it was 600 in the report, but again, don't quote me,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I just literally just glanced at it. But I know in talking with Chris, it's not just that part of it, and that's why I have to go in more detail, because it's, bless you, it's the water, it's actually the water runoff and the, sewage side of it. So I think there's more to it than that 600, so, that, and that was in 2019, so I don't know how much has been added already.
Can we also put in there that also, if we're talking 40 permits, there's the breakdown of that. And where is the sewer and water actually impacted? That's probably in the growth area. So if you take that 40 number, what are we actually talking about? Are we talking about the 20?
But you're
We're not
talking
actually talking
maximum.
about the 40.
That's a good point, Jim. You're talking maximum of 20.
So I see, when I look at the map of transition, we've got transition here down at Goose Rocks Beach, and we're on sewer.
Right.
So
But
that,
we left Goose Rock's Beach off of the growth area, because obviously we're not trying to drive growth to that area.
no, but to Jim's
So-
point about, if.
Oh, you could add, you're right,
So-
you're right, you're
So
right.
it,
You could
so
add
I
some
would
from
take,
transition.
I would take the growth of 20, the transition of 12, so that's 32, and then eight rural are pretty much probably septic, but the transition, if you want to grab 8 or 6 of the 12, that's fine. So you're somewhere between 26 and 28, shy of 30 or something, 30 max.
But
Yeah.
even in the
But
growth
you
area,
also,
the growth area doesn't, you could build a home in the growth area and not put it on sewer, right? That growth area is what was 1,000 feet from infrastructure. And so somebody putting in a single residence 1,000 feet from infrastructure, he's not gonna wanna pay, whatever it would
Yeah.
cost to bring sewer all the way down to his house,
Yeah.
right? If it's a development, yes,
Potentially, it could be,
but a single resident, likely not,
Yeah.
right? So,
what's also, what we should keep in mind is if somebody already has a house in, say, the rural, and they have their sewer and septic, they've had an established septic built, and say it's for a 3-bedroom. If they add on to that and they try to incorporate that into it, they're out of code. They're going to have to build a bigger septic at that point. So I don't want to say that's a deterrent, but it's also an added expense that they have to anticipate. If they add a one bedroom or a two-bedroom accessory dwelling, they're gonna have to expand their septic in that. So,
I mean, that begs a good question, Jim, and that is, they go in for a building permit, they get a design for a accessory apartment and detached building with 2 new bedrooms. Are they going to have to prove their septic worthiness at that point? Or do they just?
well, they should, yeah.
Or do they get issued a building permit? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. in
Yeah,
this-
I mean,
in this one.
I think they're gonna have to, because if not, they're gonna, it's not gonna be a cost-effective thing. They're gonna ruin their septic. Like, I built my house as a 4-bedroom. It's only a 3-bedroom, thinking maybe I'd have a garage with another bedroom above it. But, you know, so I have I'm oversized, but you don't wanna be undersized with a septic. You're just gonna be spending more money in the water.
So on the ADUs too, so we have in the bill, it had 190 square feet minimum. And do we have a maximum requirement in our current code for the size? Are we going to, because they left it up to the municipalities to put in a maximum size.
We do have a maximum.
Do we know what that is, Galen?
Yeah.
Is it 890? Is that sticking as a
800
number?
maybe?
800?
Seven?
Yeah, I forget what number we put in.
Okay, thank you.
I was thinking 600.
Maximum of 800.
800?
190 minimum, maximum 800.
800. And then Mary Beth, going back to your other point, the state issued their guidance on LD 2003, and they specifically had that question asked about non-conforming lots. A pre-existing single-family dwelling is on a non-conforming lot with respect to size, frontage, similar characteristics. Can an ADU be built on that? And their answer is this will be addressed in rulemaking.
Which did not happen.
Which will
Which
be
is not-
addressed in rulemaking?
Rulemaking, their rulemaking.
The
When
department's
they get
rulemaking.
around to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so then
so
you
the horse is
read
before the-
that as that so then do we read that we could say if it's a non-conforming lot, we would not allow an ADU? Could we make that?
Until the rulemaking tells you otherwise.
Well, until the I'm just trying to go back to,
We-
the look and
I
feel.
think you would have
Yeah.
justification for a detached auxiliary apartment,
Right,
Yes,
right? But not necessarily
for attached.
for it, or one that's attached to it.
Yeah.
That adds to the footprint. But one that's built within, we would have a hard time, I think, justifying.
oh, no, I
Right.
think one built within, because if you look at the intent, what we're trying to do, for this one, we're trying to keep look and feel, neighborhood look and feel, right?
Yeah,
Right,
So if we try to do neighborhood look and feel, anything they do inside is irrelevant to look and feel.
Right.
But if they go to do something with a attach, increase footprint on a non-conforming, or if they try to build new on a non-conforming, if there's no state thing saying that we shall comply, then I think we would want to push the metal on this one and say, non-conforming, you're out of luck. You already got non-conforming, so.
Yeah, let's not make it more,
Non-conforming.
not worse.
well, to paint the picture, you're talking about maybe a 24 by 24 size structure. That's what 600 feet would approximately be. So you're talking about the size of a garage.
800.
Just
little
throw
lower.
that up.
2-car garage.
I'm sorry. Is it 600 or 800?
800.
Okay, so it's 800. So what's that?
right.
But you could be talking about a street in the port with 7 houses next to each other that are all in non-conforming lots. Across the street, 7 houses on all non-conforming lots. And then you're going to allow each one of those 14 houses to put in, your 800 square foot place. You just severely changed look and feel, and I think that's a hard one. I feel like the person already has the get out of jail free card with the non-conforming lot. And they have the ability to do an ADU or an accessory apartment within their current
Within.
structure. So they can reconfigure a house to get what they need.
Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with that, we take that approach. right? That it has to be a conforming lot to have it detached or to add on to your structure. Until they come up with a rulemaking that tells us differently. My guess is because of the fact that they've already said you can't do lot coverage, that if they could, in a non-conforming lot, that they could build a structure and meet all setback requirements currently, which might be a challenge anyways, then they'd be okay. But who knows, right? Who knows what they'll come up with?
Dan? I think it's necessary to kind of give some examples on what the non-conforming lot's going to be. And what I mean by that is, that say, for example, you got the two examples where you got 7 places in a row. If they're all triangles and you're trying to build something, if it's 800 square feet, but within that triangle, you can't even build the 800 square feet. Maybe you only got 100 square feet. So now you're talking a smaller structure. I think it's necessary to kind of put some examples of what those non-conforming lots may be, so the public has an idea of what they'd be seeing. It's not as easy as you got 7 in a row, they're all square. You know what I mean? Non-conforming lots, either there's too much ledge, or, you know, it's a triangle, or it's just, you know, whoever 50 years ago broke it up and now there's like one small piece that's somebody's trying to work with. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically all the homes that were built before zoning was put in place, right?
Right.
I mean, and then we said it was
Correct.
40,000 square feet, and then you got 32.
Right, and that's probably what
Yeah,
it's like down on the
so-
beach, for sure.
Right, or you don't have the 25-foot setback, or whatever the number is, but that's the way it was built, so.
I agree with Mary Beth. I think
So-
until we know more or the rule changes, I think we vote to,
So Gail, and what
Something
I'm
like that.
hearing, if I repeat, is that we could do, for homes with non-conforming lots, you can still put an ADU inside your
within,
structure.
Right.
not.
We have no choice.
But you could not do attachment to the existing structure or add a detached ADU.
Can't change the footprint
Yeah.
and.
Can't change the footprint.
And can't build
You
it.
can't put detached.
And that's what you're recommending?
Yes.
Yeah, is that something that you think,
I don't see why not. We can try it.
yeah,
Can we
Hey-
maybe reach out to Lee J?
Yeah.
yeah, so we could follow up on the adjustment to the auxiliary apartment reference that he already changed, whether or not how we add that in.
In
And
our
that-
current building codes, that you look at the number of bathrooms, is that how you determine, say, for a septic? How large a septic system has to be? So in ADU, are you looking at bathrooms as well?
I mean, you should, you're adding another bathroom.
yeah, it'd be a
It's an
good-
independent unit.
Yeah,
It's not reliant on the first one.
Yeah,
The
you're,
septic is based on bedrooms.
yeah, it's bedrooms.
Right.
Right, so if you're adding another bathroom,
yeah.
your septic would have to be able to,
they still gotta get a building permit, you still gotta
Right.
go through the whole process.
The bedrooms determine the occupancy.
Yeah.
So that size is.
You could have 25 bathrooms in your house. It's all based on the bedrooms.
So
Yeah.
you can have, you know, so it's the occupancy of the use of the bedrooms that determines your occupancy basically. Okay, all right, well, those were my questions for the ADU.
Okay. I should point out that we did meet with Lori, just really to talk about the timing, right? The original timing was you gotta have all of your ordinance changes in by the 5th, right? They still want to know which ones we plan to put forward very soon, but we have until like mid-February to make changes and modify and structure. But by then, at that point, we're sort of done because of all the requirements and notifications for
Sure.
public hearings and all that, and they give everybody an opportunity to do what they have to do, and the Board of the Selectmen to review it and have a public hearing on ordinance changes. So, so we do have a little bit of time to caress some of these. And then the decision, I mean, it's gonna be very difficult to get through all 3 of these within our 4 meetings, basically. I guess the risk, and I watched a bit of the planning board meeting today during my lunch break on, that's a wonderful thing to do, for 20 minutes, watch the planning board. But it was when Werner was talking to the planning board about LD 2003, right? And it was just kind of giving them an overview. He didn't have a presentation. And he was talking about the whole, you know, the fact that they have to put forward, go through their rulemaking process. And his tact, as he discussed with us, was let's get this ADU piece going. The other ones, let's wait and see what they say. But they haven't done that piece yet, right? And so that's why we've been sort of in this wait mode. But the risk is, and as he noted in there, is that a developer could come in and say, statute says I can do this. You say, I say I can't. I'm taking it to court.
Right.
Because I want to do this. That's what the state law says. And likely, we're going to be forced, maybe we're given some additional time, but we'll have to make some changes to comply if we don't do those for the
Yeah,
July.
I think it's, so that's where it gets funny with me, because of the conversation we just had, which said that we would keep the cap on the growth permits.
Do we what? Keep the cap?
Yeah. So, to me, that's a little, so we will be 40, right? So next year, say we adopted all LD 2003.
Yeah, we still got our cap.
1, 2, 3, we still have the cap.
Yep.
Not the accessory apartment, but everything else
Right.
is counted into the growth permits. So if a developer came in, they would still need to pull those growth permits,
Right.
which then it's sort of like we have a containment zone.
Well, we do.
So
we
if
do.
somebody wanted to come in and put in, you know, this is where I didn't understand, and we can get to it when we get to it, but I'll just throw it out there. We don't have to talk about it now. But this is where I was trying to put the map all together. So I heard that statement about a developer coming in. I still have questions. I'm no lawyer. I don't play one on TV. And I just have questions about, you know, home rule versus Maine state law and the home rule issue, and that we vote on it. So I mean, sometime offline, I would like some lawyer to explain to me how a developer could sue a town where people voted against something. It, you know, to me, I mean, I can't square it up.
Well, I mean, you could definitely sue, right? You could sue anyways. Whether or not, what one ever thought would happen if a suit everyone brought to us for this. We didn't comply with LD 2003. A developer came in and said, okay, I'm going to put in, you know, a 50-house affordable using development in this area. And it meets all the requirements of LD 2003, but it's not, doesn't comply with your ordinances. Is that likely the judge would force us to change our ordinances to comply?
And the growth
It may not be exactly
don't
how he
apply
wants it.
for affordable housing
Yeah.
units.
Oh, okay, so that's, so,
If you had a mixed development where you had 30 units of market rate and, you know, 30 units of,
affordable housing.
affordable housing, the 30 don't count. That's how a large project could
Yeah.
happen.
Could happen.
Okay,
It would
so,
be an
But they-
incentive to,
But they still would have to get those 20 permits.
right, they'd still have to get the 20.
yeah, so they still have to get
If we
the,
get it done in a year, you'd have to,
yeah, so they'd still have to get those 20 of,
Right.
say they're in the growth zone and there's only 20 permits.
and they'd have to get all 20. I mean, somebody else could have come in and gotten, you know, 5 or 6 of them. So,
Like in Binnacle Hill in our neighborhood, we moved them to the growth zone from transition. They came in and requested a change when they decided to put in sewer versus septics. Then the infrastructure supported them being in the growth
yeah.
zone. So
Transition.
they were moved, that zone. It was, you know, it could have been neither, but it was moved to growth because of this availability then. They paid to put the,
Put the sewer,
That was rural to transition.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
thank
rural
you.
to transition. There's no growth. I don't want anyone to think there's
Okay.
growth down in.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no problem.
yeah, I was gonna say on my handy dandy
Yeah.
cheat sheet, I don't see any light yellow.
No.
It was transition.
All right, so that's interesting. So again, I always go back to the dollars and cents. And, you know, our town is a system, right? And our system has a latitude with the wastewater treatment plant. And so our growth design has to fit within that envelope, otherwise the town has to start spending some money on updating the facility. And so that's where I get, you know, that's what's hard for me on the affordable housing part. You know, the town has no ability, and the state has not come in and offered
To fund it,
to fund,
no.
you know, either streets or, you know, sewage treatment or anything else that comes from this. And so from our community base of 3,600, that's where, you know, it's, you know, we love to say our mill rate's so low. You know, that's where I start getting concerned, because how do you then make it so 2 years from now, we're not literally in deep, you know what, and we need to build a new sewage treatment plant fast.
Hey, Galen, was there any, in any of that guidance, in any of the, anything you participated in, was that question ever posed? Could a town be compelled to upgrade their sewer to allow for, you know, an affordable housing project that otherwise would be allowed by LD 2003?
Yep.
Yeah.
But there's no infrastructure to support it.
That's an interesting question. I haven't looked at the affordable housing piece. And again, I'm still trying to get my bearings with Kennebunkport, but you guys don't have an impact fee or any kind of requirement that the developer has to provide upgrades to any kind of subdivision plan or site plan that gets approved?
Well, I mean, the
just-
whole development goes through the planning board.
Yeah, I mean,
And they pay for the development itself,
They-
but
They
Yeah.
pay for the development infrastructure costs, don't
Yeah.
they?
yeah,
they would pay to extend the sewer,
Right.
but, and I think there is a connection fee,
Right.
sewer connection fee per unit.
but we're talking about the capacity, you know, blowing out the capacity at the wastewater treatment plant and having to upgrade a whole treatment plant because we've extended the capacity. So we're chugging along, right? We're in
Yep.
Kennebunkport, we're chugging along with our 40 growth permits a year, and, you know, 20 or whatever of those, between 20 and 30 of those, you know, probably have a sewer impact to them, and we have a capacity limit, and now all of a sudden we add a lot of noise into the system with, you know, specifically that we can't control, which is the affordable housing piece of this.
And ADUs.
And ADUs, right? So we just finished the ADU discussion, which is, oh, you know what, we haven't had a lot of ADUs going on, but, you know, the point I brought up before is that it really hasn't been publicized to the point where I think people understand,
Right.
you know, that they have the capability to do this in any section of our town. So, you know, I think, Galen, we need some advice from yourself and
Yep.
from Lee J in terms of, you know, and again, I think the state would have to give, you know, some lenience to towns unless they're going to give us some cash. You know, it's a funny situation to be in.
I guess
Aren't we in compliance? Aren't we in compliance if our permits are in compliance? That's in line with the sewer growth and the anticipation from that department, correct?
Correct,
No,
and I would
what-
counter to that, when you consider developments and they go before the planning board, they also have to get letters of capacity from the sewer and water district. So you're not going to approve a development and not have that letter from the city, the town, that says, hey, we have capacity for this development. If the development that's being proposed stretches your capacity, the project doesn't have to go forward.
No, it doesn't.
Right. But they,
We can't do that. We'd be setting our town up for failure.
Right.
Like,
but,
The planning board wouldn't approve any development plans.
no.
And that,
hey, Galen, though, could the developer then say, okay, fine, you don't have any sewer, I still want to put it in, I'll put in my own
Sure.
system?
yeah, if
Right.
he makes a septic system that is compliant, they can do it.
Yep.
So I think, so that's good. That's good clarification. And so also give to Jim's point, you know, to remind everybody that what you guys had said and clarified is that, you know, the a developer, affordable housing development defined as 51% of it is affordable housing, and the 49% of it can be market-based housing. And then that 49% is the only ones that are going to be pulling growth permits, with the 51% not requiring a growth permit. But then if you're saying, Galen, that you now have to go in front of the planning board, and the town has to come forward and give some, letters that, yes, we can handle this capacity. I think the only thing I'd like to think through on that one, not for today, but maybe some guidance from Galen and stuff, is you don't want to take a big bite out of the apple, like within the first 2 years. We have to be very conscious of when that capacity unit hits. I'm making stuff up.
Yep.
Maybe we were on a 10-year plan. I don't know. Maybe it's 8, who knows, 12. But we don't want to go in and take a huge bite, and then now we're on a 4-year plan, before we
sure.
have to update it.
Right. And that's, that's the whole reason behind the growth permits, right, before affordable housing and the LD 2003. That was the whole reason why it was structured the way it was structured. But we also had to show the 110% was that we would allow growth to occur, and that if we couldn't keep a flat cap. I recall that discussion, it's 15 years ago, so you're tracking my memory cells here, but I recall we couldn't just say 40 is the number forever. So we had to show that there was flexibility and willingness to grow, and so that's why we based it on the average at the last 10 years, 110% of the last 10 years, or 40 as a minimum. And we've been stuck at 40. We haven't even got to 41 yet, right? So,
Yeah, I think it might be worthy of maybe getting some information from that sewer department too, in relation to, we do have a 40 growth permit. So say 20, I'm just throwing out the 20. Each year they must anticipate when they do their budgets, they do whatever, they're going to anticipate the what if questions, the fear question, or however you want to call it. Like, we may have 20 more. So they must be forecasting out that we need to anticipate this, we need to grow. So I think it might be important to get some information from them, and also, to share with the public, say we look at the past 5 years, how many permits have we actually given out? Have we hit our cap? And I know that, there's the questions that, these kind of new laws may make people rush to get whatever, but they do have the opportunity to build one right now. And, have we constantly hit our numbers due to that, So.
If I recall, the last time we looked at that, we max out on the rural every single year. Transition is close, and growth, I think for the most part, we never hit the 20 until maybe 2 years ago we hit 20.
Yeah, and probably we did again.
So if somebody's in the growth and they demolish their house, do they count
No growth permit,
no growth permit?
just a building permit.
If somebody is in the growth area and demolishes their house, and instead of doing the one building on LD 2003, they now can do 4, do they require a growth permit?
It's a good question.
Well, that was one of the,
I think they let that up to us. to
yeah,
decide.
one of the issue items that we were talking about last time was to make sure, and that was also the case in the town that reversed themselves. Was that Wells or South Portland? Because they had the first time they adopted, the Board of Selectmen approved it, they allowed for a knockdown to be counted as vacant land. And everybody got upset by that. So the proposal, they came in within a month, they revoted to carve that out to say, if there was a building on it in whatever date, it's not vacant land. You don't get the advantage of the 4 on 1. You follow the other part of the rule, which is existing house
And another,
And-
2.
Yeah,
and another 2 versus,
right.
is that what
No,
it is?
2 total, well.
total.
2 total.
This is another part of the, or not
Yeah.
the accessory, this is just how many how many
Yeah.
houses can you put on, how many individual dwelling units can you put on a lot previously zoned for single-family? We really haven't talked about that, except
Right.
But-
for that
yeah.
problem.
So most of our zones, I was looking through this the other night. If you look at all our zones, obviously we allow single-family and we allow two-family. There's a permitted use in every zone. And then we have a multiplex.
In one building, right, currently? I mean, it has to be,
Yeah,
the
two-fam-
two-family
the two-family is
has
one-
to be in
it's a-
one
a
structure.
It's a structure, one structure,
In every zone,
in every zone, as a permitted use,
okay.
right? So it's not a conditional use. A conditional use, we allow multiplexes in some, maybe half of them, but not all. I wrote it down somewhere. Like Village Residential, Visitor Residential East, I think it's Cape Porpoise Square, and
Is a multiplex, can a multiplex be,
I think a
Multiple
multiplexes are
buildings? I know it's more than 2 units.
yeah. We don't have a great definition of that, I don't
Oh,
think.
okay.
I've come
Yeah, I
across.
can't remember what it is either.
But I understood it to be a single family,
That's what I thought.
a single dwelling.
Right.
A single structure, sorry. Do you know, Galen, I don't know if you've dived, how far you've been able to dive into our ordinance. I don't have, what the definition of the multiplex is.
Yeah, I can pull it up for you. I would call it an apartment building, is what your multiplex is. But it does have a unique, definition for sure.
Let me, sorry, I did find it. I did write it down. Memory. Multiplex dwelling, a building for residential occupancy by 3 or more families living independently of one another, containing 3 or more dwelling units, including apartment buildings and condominiums, but excluding single-family dwellings with accessory apartments. And we currently allow single and two-family as permitted use in all zones, multiplex as conditional use in Village Residential, Village Residential East, Dock Square, Riverfront, and Cape Porpoise Square. Interesting, it's not allowed in Farm and Forest or,
So did you conclude that could be in more than one building, or that's one building?
I took that as one building.
And it can contain no more than 8 dwelling units.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It says a multiplex building shall contain no more than 8 dwelling units. In a site with more than one multiplex building, a total number of dwelling units shall not exceed an average of 6 dwelling units per building. So if you had like multiple multiplexes on a property, you had to average out 6 dwelling units per building.
Okay. Do we say how many multiplexes are allowed? Or,
No, it would go off your residential density, and it has to supply water at a rate of 850 gallons per day per dwelling for adequate water pressure for fire suppression purposes.
okay, and that's current, our current,
Current.
Yeah.
current,
24711 is that definition.
okay.
Yep.
240.711. Thank you.
But
Right.
under that, I forget what the provision is in 2003, vacant land, single-family lot zoned for single-family, which you could put a two-family on. Now you could put multiple buildings, multiple dwelling buildings.
Right, but we could set the minimum lot.
Right, we
size.
haven't discussed that.
We can set the minimum lot coverage.
Okay,
So-
so for ADUs, if, just to sum up, ADUs were going to make some small changes, put up for the warrant, would include the changes that Lee J is proposing for the water runoff. We're going to add in nonconformance.
Right,
Anything that's on a nonconformant lot is not applicable to ADU, that only an ADU accessory apartment inside the current structure. And we just, to our points and what Jim brought up also, we just want to, when we're talking to, the town about the waste, we just need to get an idea of that so that we can put some ideas together of what future would look like in terms of how many we think would be doing ADUs and how does that impact? Because we don't need any permits for them, no growth
Right.
permits. Okay. And we weren't going to add anything, we're not changing the size of the ADU. And then parking for ADUs is anything, we can't require any parking for ADUs, right?
That's correct.
Right, and under our,
Affordable housing is 0.66, 2/3.
and what was the parking, the issue I pointed out, which I've, trying to remember where it was, in our ordinance. The parking, the parking that we had to change, was that ADU additional requirement that we could no longer include as an additional requirement?
In the first draft, there was a difference in the affordable housing, that parking requirement, and Lige did change that.
Yeah, he added a section D, 1.5 per unit. Is that what it was?
It should be updated now. It should be 0.66.
Oh, okay.
Galen?
Yes.
Can I ask, is that kind of a gray area as far as the parking that hasn't been defined? Because the example, if there's more of a metropolis-looking area where they may have buildings or something where they have to anticipate some kind of like parking garage or whatever in relation to, we may have more open area, not necessarily off-street parking. Is that been kind of set aside as a gray area, in your opinion?
I actually was on a Zoom call with former Speaker Fecto, and I brought up this concern, especially in northern Maine, where they don't have public infrastructure for transportation, and all these other requirements that you need a car basically to get around in the wintertime. And it was basically just pushed to the side. So nope, there was no gray area for that. They do not want, they find parking spaces as a barrier to development and progress. And so that's why they're doing this for affordable housing.
Yeah. But it's, the parking piece for an ADU is that you just can't require any more than what you did required for a single family. That's what they say, right, in the standard, or in the regulation.
Yeah, I was trying to find that in our, it's not in the accessory apartment.
Yeah, accessory dwelling unit may not be subject to any additional parking requirements beyond parking requirements of the single-family dwelling unit on the lot where the accessory dwelling unit is located. So whatever is there now for the single-family home or the two-family home is what's allowed, or is all that's required for if you add an ADU. So if it was 2 parking spots, it's still 2 parking spots, even if you now have a requirement for 3.
You can't add another one for the ADU.
Yeah.
Right, okay, it says that in 24610 already.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
2 off-street, and then it says accessory apartments not required to have additional
Yeah.
Okay. So,
off-street parking.
so
And then they
that,
had parking in the affordable density. So in the development, affordable housing development, they had that requirement where you could only require off-street parking for 2
yeah,
out of every 3
3 units.
units.
Yep.
But I don't
You got-
think there's any reason why we can't require as part of that development that the on-street parking has to be within the development.
Yeah, I think when we, yeah,
In other words, so if you're putting a road in and you got, then that road and everything else, you got to put all your cars on that. So you're not parking out here on North Street.
Oh, I
You're
see.
parking on whatever road you built for the affordable housing.
Isn't that a requirement already in your land use code?
Well, I think that's something we could make as a requirement, right? It doesn't say we can't. It just says we can't require off-street parking.
but in what Dan is saying, if, when it goes through the planning board, we could have it set up for development where in the definition of a development, they have to have containment of parking spaces and, quote, off-street parking within the roads, within the development.
Right.
So if we could go back to ADUs and parking.
Okay.
So I get that we're not required, and we align right now with the law of LD 2003. I'm there. But now let's go back to short-term rental. So now I'm at the beach. I have a house and an ADU. I move into my ADU and rent out my house, and I can do that, and I just have to go to the town and pull a permit.
A short-term rental permit.
Short-term rental permit. Now, what does that do for parking? Because short-term rentals, you need to have parking spots. So then, does the short-term rental agreement have to not pay attention to the ADU parking requirements?
Well, the short-term rental, you'd have to provide a map to show where your parking is for the rental unit. If the rental unit is the main house, say, then you'd have to show, I don't know if it's 2 or if it's more than 2, short-term rental versus a dwelling unit. Is it the same? I don't know.
It's a good question.
But you'd have to show that, and you would have to also, I assume, show where the ADU is parking.
Yeah, it sort of seems like our short-term rental would be in conflict of the spirit of the ADU, and that I would see somebody coming back and maybe suing the town saying, hey, you can't, there's no requirement for short-term rental parking, so you can't not give me a short-term rental. You know, you just see, I think
Requirement for the ADU parking.
you can't give me a requirement for the ADU parking if I'm trying to pull a short-term rental. So I think we just need, that's one of those things that's a side effect, and we need to
Yeah, no, that's
talk through it and make sure that we've got the right understanding for people. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be whatever the parking requirements is for a single-family house, and everything else can park wherever they want. And, right?
I think we need confirmation on what the short-term rental ordinance says
But the
to
people that live,
answer the what-if question.
I guess the point I would make on that is, well, if you're renting out the house and you're allowed to have 2 parking spots for your home, then those only 2 parking spots for the rental. And if you're living in your ADU, you don't need a parking spot at your place, but the on-street parking has got to be associated with that ADU, or the accessory apartment.
So it
Right.
would seem to me if there are 2 parking spots,
Which
the
would be hard to-
ADU could use one of them, and they
Right.
could say for the rental, they could have one.
Right, but you couldn't have, like my family, everybody drives, show up with 5 different cars to stay at the place.
Yeah, I think we
It's all
just
separate
need,
ways,
yeah,
right?
I think we need Galen to, I think we need to knit that one together, because I think it does, I had listed parking as one of my 5, right? And that is an issue within town, specifically one of the premises of the short-term rentals, making sure that we had the due diligence of the parking spots and making roads accessible, are very small, narrow roads in some areas. So I think it's just something that we need to make sure that that one's dotted and crossed.
The current short-term rental, which is 129.7, the applicant shall include a depiction designating parking spaces that will be provided for tenants and guests on the same lot where the short-term rental is located. Guest parking at the short-term rental shall occur in parking spaces designated by the applicant, and the number of guest vehicles allowed on the short-term rental shall be limited to the number of on-site parking designated by the applicant. Garage parking spaces are not allowed for tenant use. Parking spaces not allowed for tenant use can't be counted, essentially. Tenants and guests of short-term rentals are prohibited from parking in a manner that impedes emergency vehicles, etc. So it's not a specific number. So it defaults to you need 2 for the dwelling unit. And if you only depict 2 on the map, then that's all the cars you're technically allowed to,
Okay,
your renter is allowed to bring.
good.
Just
All
the
right.
enforcement of it, that would be.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think it's an enforcement of it.
Whose cars, whose,
Yep.
and
All right, so so ADU is sort of buttoned up with those changes, right?
You got it.
Okay,
Great
think so.
questions.
so,
Another thing about parking, your subsection O under 240-6.9 for off-street parking and loading standards. It has any temporary overflow parking as defined in this chapter shall be exempted from the requirements of this section. Such temporary overflow parking may be offered to the general public only with the prior authorization of the Board of Selectmen for a maximum of 24 days per year per site on property owned, operated, and controlled by the town of Kennebunkport. If so authorized, such temporary overflow public parking shall not be considered a separate principal use, notwithstanding the requirements of Article 4. So your standards are pretty, they have to have them off-site. I don't see anything here that's saying that they're allowed on the roads or in the public right of way.
Right.
Good, so it already sets the, okay. So we're gonna go do 2 to 4 units, or are we going to affordable housing next?
I think affordable housing, the density one might be the easier of the two to get through.
Okay.
In my review, I think the 2 to 4 will be difficult. Right, because at least now we're talking about a development that would have to occur in the growth area,
Okay.
right? It's not anywhere else, it can't be in rural, can't be in transition.
So can I go across my little question?
Sure.
Please.
All right.
Good structure.
So, affordable housing then, for 200. Are certain sections covered in the Kennebunkport ordinance currently? Is multiplexes and those things? No? Not affordable, right?
Could be affordable, but
But
Well, it
not,
could be affordable.
but they're not really,
Right.
right? Okay, so
Well,
we
they could be
say,
built to be affordable.
yeah, they could be. but
yeah,
they-
someone could get
yeah.
funding or,
Yeah, but right now, no. Okay. So to what you guys just said, applicable areas, growth, transition, rural, shoreland, this is only growth,
Only growth.
only growth.
That's correct, right, Galen?
that's if
Say
you
that
want
Say
the,
that question again.
The affordable housing density part, so if you're doing an affordable housing development, that's specific to the growth area?
you can do it anywhere, but if you want the density bonus, it has to be in your
Okay,
growth area if you have a comprehensive plan, if I remember.
yes.
Uh,
Is that correct?
I will have to confirm that.
Okay.
That's a good question.
And the density bonus is going to 4?
No,
No,
this is
2.5 times.
2.5 times
times what your
the-
normal,
normal permitted.
I thought it was just 2.5 times your density, but I'll double check.
but I think it was,
Here. Do you have 2003?
yeah.
Density requirements. A municipality shall allow an affordable housing development where multifamily dwellings are allowed to have a dwelling unit density of at least 2.5 times the base density that is otherwise allowed in that location, and may not require more than 2 off-street parking spaces for every 3 units. The development must be in a designated growth area of a municipality consistent with section 4349A, subsection 1, paragraph A or B, or the development must be served by a public special district or other centrally managed water system and a public special district or other comparable sewer system. The development must comply with minimum lot size requirements in accordance with Title 12.
So I read it as growth area only.
Yeah, I read that, but I wonder if that's what that really means.
So Galen, that's what you're gonna check on us, if it's growth area only?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And so what we were talking about before, you know, this, what you just read, Dan, you know, specifies, and growth area means sewer, water, hookup,
Yep.
you know, so it's all under that thing. But what we just got done talking through is if somebody's building a development in a growth area, they don't have to hook up to sewer and water, right?
Right, but they would have to then do, you know, the other part where they have to do a centrally managed
Yeah.
water system and a centrally managed septic system.
Yeah, so for example, if a growth, if a affordable housing unit came in and it was in the growth area, if it was 60 units, so 29 of them were affordable housing, were
Market.
market-based housing, and, 31 of them are affordable housing. Then, and if they got rejected by for whatever reason, by the town, they could go in and structure their own waste treatment plant, septic system.
Yeah. But we would have to show that we were
I mean, if
at
we didn't have
beyond our
capacity.
stage. We
Yeah.
couldn't say, oh, we only have 100 left, so we only want to give you 10. I think we'd have to give them the number, right? Because we're not at capacity. But if we were at capacity and or if we were 10 away from capacity, it's okay, we can give you 10, but you got to build the rest. I think that'd be our only real basis.
So, for example, if somebody came into an area and was going to put in 300 units of affordable housing, they require no growth permits.
Right.
So I think that goes back to that thing of, we have to work on what is the capacity for the system, and then, because we never want to be caught like 2 years away from having to redo a sewage.
Right. Well, I mean, we should be doing that honestly now, right?
Yeah.
Because we know this. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we had like I was saying, we had the growth permit in place was to allow us to build a kitty to address future, and they are spending money on that, right? And they're addressing pump stations, and they're trying to address them and build them and harden them against sea level rise going forward, right?
Right, but it's
So
not expansion, the
That's
money's
not
it's
going
not,
into.
it's going to existing
hardening,
structure.
yeah.
It's
It's
that's
rebuilding
just-
the
But
old
it's
system.
an
It's
old system.
rebuilding, it's not increasing the latitude or expansions
Right.
of capacity.
That's gonna
So
take land.
I think that is sort of, So that's the tricky part here, is that we were managing it by the growth permits, but this just could be Pandora's. This is how we have to sort of get some help in terms of.
It could be, I personally have a hard time seeing where someone's gonna come in and do this. Right?
But it could, and we need to
could.
be prepared.
It could, we gotta prepare for it, but at the same time, what's the reality that someone's gonna come in and build a 100-unit affordable housing in Kennebunkport
We
as a
have
developer?
a comprehensive plan
Yeah,
that talks about
gotta get close
maintaining
to
the
the mic.
character.
You got to talk to the mic.
We have a comprehensive plan that talks about maintaining the character of the community,
right.
and that's,
They can't hear you.
they can't unless they.
I can't, we
You
can.
got to get closer.
Yeah, you gotta close.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tilt it down.
And tilt it down.
There you go.
Okay. Thank you. So I think, some of this just doesn't seem to make sense. If a lot of work was put into making the comprehensive plan and talking to people and what they envision for Kennebunkport, and it sounds like now we are talking about doing things or the possibility of things happening that would not help us maintain the character of Kennebunkport. And, so much relies upon the tourists coming into town and it being a town that they want to come to relax and enjoy themselves, and a place where people want to move and have their children come to. And if we start sort of overdeveloping it so quickly, if we have 100 units
Yeah.
of affordable housing coming in here, what does that do to the character of our community? It just doesn't seem to go along with what we have already worked a whole lot on, or, some people in town have worked on in terms of developing a vision for Kennebunkport.
Incredibly valid point. Unfortunately, that's lost on the folks that were up in Augusta, and they wrote a law that we're trying to comply with. And the tricky piece is how do you, in my opinion, two pieces is what we're talking about here, right, with the infrastructure. If someone were to decide to come in here and do a big affordable housing development, what would that impact be? I'm concerned more also on how we write our ordinances and make changes that someone could come in and then use it for not developing affordable housing, but putting in 100 units of, $1 million condos, and what that would do to our town as well. So,
Hey, Dan?
yes,
I think it might be worthy to note, if we're going to reach out to the sewer department, maybe that's a question that can be posed to them. They need to understand what the impacts of this is going to be. So if we throw the scenario at them to say, this is how we've been, you know, doing things, and this is how you've always been anticipating the expansion of the sewer system, the sewer infrastructure. If this was the scenario, just give them the example, like that 100 unit, you know, if this happens, what's the impact? What does that mean? You tell us that, no, that's a red flag. We need to stop. That would cause us to have to completely redo the whole system, or we'd have to propose to the town that, you know, you're not going to meet capacity. You got to build a whole brand new thing, which is going to project out to be a 5-year plan, yada, yada, yada. Maybe it's best that we get that information from them instead of trying to sit here and say, what if, you know,
Yeah,
I would rather have them give us feedback on that. Now, to go to the other part is, if say a developer says, well, I don't need to rely on the septic. I'm gonna build a whole septic system. And so the planning board is also gonna have to look at that and say, you know, if you're building 100 unit, even if it's a multiplex, and you start taking the considerations of, like, you know, the footprint of where it is, you know, 100 units, building your own septic and then trying to meet the capacity of, like, the multiplex with a certain amount of pressure of water on wells, it's going to be a far stretch, in my opinion. I mean, it doesn't mean that it can't. If somebody really wants to spend that much money, I don't think they're going to get it back. But to have all those footprints of a septic, you know, you're going to start. You're changing the way it is. You got 100-foot setback between a well and a septic. Then you're going to build the place. You're going to have a huge lot. I don't know if we have that in the growth areas.
Right, and
You know,
and that's a limiting factor. That
Right.
our topography, what's available,
Right.
Are all limiting factors, and the price of land in this town is also a deterrent. There's a land, you know, if you want to do an affordable housing project, you're probably not going to look at our per acre price in Kennebunkport versus some other places.
You also have there's also geological, like, you look at it, not every lot is buildable. And what that means is you can have a lot of ledge. You could have, if you really want to build those and have your own septic, you don't have the kind of material that will absorb that. So you're going to have to build up. You're spending more money to make that happen if you're not willing to go on the current septic or water. It's not cost effective.
Yeah, I think in terms of what we've been talking about, to go back to your first comment, Jim, is, yes, so the sewer department, they have their study of capacity. We'll get a deeper understanding of what that is, and I think what we're playing through here is, and then we can understand the life, because they'll have their capacity numbers and, you know, whatever else characters or factors they have to take into account there. I think what we're thinking through is, you know, what is those what ifs? So for example, you know, if 100-unit affordable housing goes in, you know, and if you say, where do we have land? We have land, you know, the town has land, the town owns land too. So, you know, in part of the village parcel surveys was about affordable housing units, you know, so that was in,
I mean,
you know, so that is something that if you're looking at 20-something in the growth area, that's in the growth area. So that's in the growth area. You know, the town's been asking questions about that for affordable housing. And that's, you know, not in the port per se, but within the town proper.
yeah, I mean, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I'd love to see an affordable housing development go in place, right? And I don't think an initial one would have an impact on our sewer. Based on what I've seen in previous reviews of the sewer, I mean, it would impact it, but wouldn't put us over.
No, I don't
I
think
mean,
it's.
we did, it was
it's
part of the
putting
comp
us-
plan as well,
Yeah.
the assessment of it, of the past 2 comp plans, right?
Yeah.
So that information is there. There are some newer information because there's been some impact because of stormwater that we've had to deal with more recently. And that impacts the availability of, you know, units that you can add. So that number should be looked at again. But it was in the hundreds the last time we looked, and I think that's probably where it is somewhere today. So like a unit coming in, a development coming in now to be built wouldn't have that immediate impact.
No, but it takes a couple bites out of the apple.
It takes a couple bites out of the
And,
apple, and
and
that
so all that just brings capital costs forward.
does bring capital costs.
And we just got done talking capital costs for infrastructure of current systems, which is pumps and everything else. We're talking about, water spillage over, we have shoreline that we're protecting. We've got, culverts that need to be shored up, redone. So there's a lot of stuff happening in the town that I just want to be conscious of, right?
Yep.
We've got a bank account,
Right.
Right.
Well,
But-
that's the idea behind the plan, the comprehensive
Yep.
plan, right? Is to help us think of those things and make
Right.
sure that we're budgeting for that future,
Yep.
right?
But all of that doesn't change, if we have run out of sewer capacity before. I tried to get a sewer permit decades ago, and for decades, we didn't have sewer capacity. The town went along without adding sewer capacity, then they changed their minds and they added sewer capacity. So that has happened before. We have capped out before. So if we were to, if a developer were to come along and try to get it through, if we have no capacity, we have no
No capacity.
capacity. It's first come, first serve.
Yep.
Whether you're building a $100,000 unit or $10 million unit, whoever gets there first gets the permit.
Right, okay.
Yep.
Good, all right, yeah, so I think this is good discussion, because then it just help us, these questions are gonna come anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
yeah, for sure.
It helps us think
For sure.
through, what is it? So really what it comes down to is so we're just gonna confirm, Galen's gonna confirm that the growth for the density is in the growth area for affordable housing.
Yes,
That it's,
Yep.
it's,
development, affordable housing development.
affordable housing development is, we're talking growth area out of our 3 areas.
And going back to last meeting and what was needed to comply, other than the parking?
Yeah, so they had the parking requirement can only require 2 off-street parking spaces for every 3 units.
Right, so that was one change.
Right, so that's a requirement, that
Right,
we
that's
can't
easy.
exceed that, but
Right.
I think in the affordable development, either somewhere in our ordinance or because they'll have to go through the subdivision. It's gonna be a subdivision,
Sure.
no matter what it is, it's still gonna have to go to the subdivision, so it has to go through the planning board. So either in their subdivision regulations or in some ordinance under parking, I recommend that we propose that any on-street parking is contained within that development itself,
Yeah, I think we
Right.
have to,
and not outside of that development.
yeah.
So they have to plan accordingly,
But if the requirement is no more than 2 on property for every 3 units,
right,
that excludes street, whether it's a private street or a public street? And they talk about on,
yeah, maybe not require more than 2 off-street parking spaces for every 3 units.
right, it's off-street, that's the only
Yeah.
requirement.
So,
So as a practical matter, you may say, oh, we need 20 guest parking spots and we need this, and I suppose you could do that within the
Right.
confines of your,
right,
Yeah, the developer can add more parking spaces if they want. The
right,
state law just says they only have to supply no more than the 2 spaces for 3 units.
but can we say that anything more than that has to be provided on the streets within the development? It's not off-street parking, but it's limited to the,
Development,
you don't want overflow outside of the development,
Yeah.
basically.
but how do you,
So they gotta make the streets wide enough so there's parking on the streets.
but you have parking
Right.
requirements for your municipal streets, overnight, no overnight, snow.
Right.
I have seen developments where they have areas where they have parking, where a lot of people can park.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah, so that usually they can handle
right.
extra.
I just don't want the development to go in and then the problem for parking becomes
But they
the
can't,
residents that move there, they got no space to park their vehicle,
as a
or
practical matter.
as a practical matter, and that we also don't end up with parking, you know, over here and
But it sounds like you can't require more than
two
two
off-street,
for every 3 units,
off-street,
off-street.
right, I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
that would
You're
be,
trying to, you're trying to define it in terms of of a private road, right, Dan?
Well, whether it's private or
Private
public, I'm
road,
just
private
trying to
driveway.
say that if they do a development, they gotta cover all the parking. They can require 2 off-street, we can require that there 2 are off-street, but the rest has to be done on-street within the development.
But you're then saying there should be, as a practical matter, a higher number than the 2
Right.
for 3. But how can
Right.
you do that? That would violate,
Ah,
you could provide it
can't.
as a smart developer to say, I don't want to, the last thing I want is these rental apartments to be calling me and the management company and,
well, I mean,
You know,
it's,
so
even if you had only one person living in each unit, they're gonna
right.
at least have 3 cars, 3 vehicles, right?
Well, I
But
think that the idea is that
Yeah.
people will carpool or use public transportation if.
Which we
there
don't
were
really have.
transportation
But not, yeah, not in our town, though.
Yeah. I mean, carpool in the United States, forget it anyways, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a,
keep in mind, affordable housing is for low to moderate income individuals, and those households generally do car share, 1 vehicle, maybe 2 vehicles for the household. So it's not unheard of that they would
yeah,
have less vehicles than than other areas, than other households. But Mary Beth, going back to your question on affordable housing, in reading the state statute, there is the or requirement. So that means either one, either it's in the growth area or there's public water and sewer available.
Oh, right.
okay, so they could
Is it
build
gr-
this in the rural area.
If there's public water and sewers, there shouldn't be any out there.
Is it just public, or can it be something they provide?
A septic.
And it wasn't septic because I think they changed that language in LD 2003, the last time I read that.
Because,
Uh,
or centrally managed water system, or other comparable sewer systems. I mean, it really opens it up to,
Sewer, it's not septic.
comparable sewer.
Yeah, that's different.
Is that different because it's not septic? Or if I build a
It could be a private sewer system.
private sewer system?
There are probably towns that have,
Yeah.
So, I mean, to put in all that for an affordable housing, it's a fairly large cost for what you can
for sure.
recover.
Anyway.
So it's, I think,
If you take a look at LD 2003 on page 4, they talk about the 4 units, that concept.
yeah,
Under subsection 4, they have a separate section in there that deals with septic systems. So they specifically mention in the state law septic system. It's subsection 4B is connected to a septic system, not sewer system. Again, I'm not an attorney, but that's why the town has one, to look over this in February
yeah, so
before the selectmen advertise it. But I would argue that that's clear that the reason to have affordable housing in your growth areas or in public sewer systems is, it's that you're not having this kind of sprawl take place
Exactly.
throughout the state.
And it's the only way you can afford to build it,
right.
is if
Right.
the infrastructure is
Well-
there.
Oh, it'd be astronomical, the cost to put in a huge septic system for.
Well, yeah, I mean, whether affordable or not, I mean, that's the whole idea behind the growth area, is to try to drive your
Right.
growth into areas where you have public infrastructure.
But in the affordable housing section of the LD 2003, on page 3, the page before where Galen was, section 5B, again, talks about sewer, septic. So so it's sort of confusing to me because
Yeah, you're right.
they put in, that's why I'm confused on whether or not this is really, okay, we go back to a developer coming in, reading this versus what we perceive. And so if I was a developer reading this, I'd say, no, section 5, paragraph B says I can be on septic.
Right.
So that, so how, it says growth area, Galen, on page 2 of the bill, for section 2, density requirements, it says 2.5 times, as Dan read, 2.5 times, and then the line 2 lines after that says the development must be in a designated growth area of a municipality consistent with section. So I
Yeah,
think,
that's your plan.
so I think we just really need clarification on where it can be.
Well, that section you were reading about septic, that could apply to one that's in a growth area, but they put it on their own special system.
I know, I think,
Right.
but that's what we need. We need to make
Well-
sure that we get clarification so that maybe when we put our language in, we can really make it very clear to a developer that it's only in the Kennebunkport designated growth areas, and just make
Hey,
it
Galen,
Yep.
clear.
are you gonna be like,
That's what I would say.
Yeah,
as we hear this, are you gonna hopefully give us some examples of, so we can all, the public and we can understand this? Because I'm looking at, that's explained to me, I could have a lot in the rural area, right? And I could build 4 affordable, houses on septics. And I mean, if the lot's big enough, it, might look fine. So, if that's the example that we need to look at, that's the example that the public needs to look at, that might paint a better picture in relation to a growth area where there's a smaller lot, but you still have the 4 units, but it's all on the sewer.
Yeah.
but this
We
is,
need to paint a picture for people to understand and rather than the what ifs.
I think we gotta actually, so this is the affordable housing, which is 2.5 times the base density, so it goes beyond 4 units.
That's a separate section.
That's a separate section. The 2 to 4 units is section B. We skipped to
Right.
section 3 because
Yeah.
Because it was going to be so easy.
this is so easy.
So the first time I read the affordable housing density piece with the development, I understood it to be on a growth area. The way it's written seems doesn't necessarily mean that,
Yeah,
but I think that's the intent.
yeah,
There are
but,
can't
towns
imagine
that
it
don't even
not to
have
be.
growth areas,
Yeah.
so it's trying to accommodate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I
if a
think,
town doesn't have a comp plan, then they don't have a growth area. They follow the
right,
public infrastructure.
right. So we have a comp plan, so we're driving this to the growth area, and I think our ordinance should say that.
yeah, I think we
Let them
need
tell
to
us
be
wrong.
very clear in our ordinance that affordable housing is only applicable
Affordable housing
to,
development,
affordable housing development
right,
is only applicable to
right,
the town's designated growth areas.
right. So you can,
We can do that.
And then what we had talked, Galen, with Lori, Dan and I, about, to Jim's point, is to get the GIS map so that we could showcase where these potentially could be, right?
Right.
And so the town, the people in the town would get an understanding of what this would, because there's only so many lots of size, right, in the growth area.
yeah, I had mentioned it to Galen when I met him. We did do, I know it's a long time ago, like 2008, 2009, we did a full build-out analysis by, I think it was Spatial Alternatives. Judy Colby George, I think was her name. So we did we took the current land use ordinances and a lot of the restrictions of the properties and had her do an analysis on what would a full build-out look like. And so there's that documentation and that paperwork. I don't have any of the documentation. I think that would have been something in Werner's office, so. Gail, if you get an opportunity, if you could look for that. I'll send you an email with the information I do have, and hopefully I'll lead you to the right
Also,
spot.
we're throwing a lot of this guy. I'd be interested in the examples of the 2.5 times density. Have an example of how that's are they going to apply with our maps? What it looks like. I think the public needs to know, like in relation to the 2003, how that applies to us, or what it looks like.
Yep. Yeah, so then, is there any changes to our setbacks with affordable housing? So we have the 2.5 times
I mean,
the
they're-
density, so that's lot size, area coverage changes, but does setbacks change? I couldn't find anything that setbacks changed.
I think you can.
So development must
I'd be
comply with
curious.
minimum lot size requirements.
Well,
In,
but it says it's
whatever theirs
2.5
are.
times the density,
right.
right?
Right.
So the rest of the rules are the same.
Okay,
That's the one that changes. If it was, 2 per acre, it would be 2.5 times that per acre.
Okay.
You'd still have your same side yard setbacks, frontage, whatever,
okay.
I would say.
And how does this work with affordable housing? Like, I know how Heritage Trust does, but affordable housing, so there'll be separate titles, tax numbers, titles?
Well, you can do a rental building,
Okay,
could be one, could be rental units. You could have market-based condos sold off, and you could keep the others as rentals. You could sell off the others as affordable. If you're selling them off as affordable, obviously they would have their own titles, depending upon what they were. Could be condos, could be.
okay. So these are, and we said that there's no growth permits required for affordable housing.
The affordable side.
Right.
And could these be short-term rentals? By default, we're saying that they're in the growth area. So if a affordable housing person that had the title, they bought an affordable house, came into the town and said, I'd like to do short-term rental on this,
Well,
they could apply. I mean,
I
so,
think there's no short-term rental available for affordable housing. I think that's part of LD 2003.
There's a deed covenant that restricts the occupancy's household income. So that would be a barrier which the town could enforce. In the state law, there was a agreement that the municipality has to agree with the developer on enforcing the income restriction guidelines.
so why wouldn't we as the town, because we have a short-term rental, why wouldn't we put in part of our affordable housing section that any affordable housing, either rental or ownership property is not, is not able to
Be a
get a
short-term
short-term rental?
I mean,
I think we would be clear like that.
Yeah, I think we should. Do we put that in that, or do we put that in the short-term rental section?
You put it in both.
Yeah, it's,
No, I mean, I
we
think
have a cap,
yeah.
we have a cap,
so
but,
someone could get online and wait 5
Yeah.
years or 2 years or whatever.
yeah, but I think what we want to do is just, like, again, we want to
Yeah,
clarify
it shouldn't be
things
part
and
of the
make it
short-term
easy.
rental. It's like it's like an accessory apartment.
Yeah, so, yeah,
Concept's the same reason, right?
Right.
It's the
Yeah.
whole idea is for it to
Exactly.
be
so we wouldn't,
someone to live in.
yeah, so we wouldn't want to enable, these would not be applicable for short-term rental. We'd have that in our ordinance.
So as far as a building being an affordable housing, I'll go through the scenario that, if I have a house and do I have the ability to build an affordable housing unit on my property? Or would it have to be a separate lot?
I think as when we get to that 2 and 4 section, if,
So if you're in the growth area,
If-
if
well,
Jim's, if,
yeah,
so
I
if
mean-
you're talking in the growth area, you
Well, I
could
mean,
put
it's-
two and
yeah,
a
but-
half times,
but it's not a development, right? He's just adding a single unit as an
Nothing
affordable unit. You could build that anywhere. And when we get to the section on 2 and 4, which really has nothing to do with affordable housing, it can be any type of housing. If you chose to build an affordable home, I don't think there'd be any restriction to that. I don't see why there would be.
But you're not going to
But-
get
Right,
it.
so
But it would just fall under the same requirements of whatever we end up deciding on how our ordinance needs to be modified to comply with LD 2003. That
So-
second structure or the four
Yeah.
structures in a growth area.
but I want to sort of poke at Jim's question, because this is where I think
Well,
maybe,
let me finish the scenario. So if in what Dan said, if I have a house and I build an affordable unit on my property and then I decide to move into that and a permit comes up for me to rent my house out as a short-term rental, I don't know. I look at it as allowing people to be self-reliant in our community. If I can do that, I don't want to restrict people from doing that.
The affordable housing density bonus, I think, relates to new developments, new housing developments that are approved after June 30th, 23. So if you already have an existing house on a lot, I don't think you're looking at, I mean, unless you're subdividing it into, a subdivision. But if you just want to add one unit, I think you're talking one of the other two parts of the statute, and whether you make it affordable or not is yours. Again, if you have a 30-acre lot with your house on it and you want to make it a new subdivision and take advantage of the density bonus, as long as you meet the criteria, you could do that.
so, but
just adding,
we have to start the sentence with, if you're in the growth area.
Right.
Right.
for
Right, so
affordable.
if
For
you're in
affordable
the,
housing for the
Yes.
affordable housing
if
development.
you're in the growth area, then you can consider affordable housing. And I think that's the question in my mind from Jim's comment is, what denotes a development? It just says affordable housing development where multifamily dwellings are allowed to have the dwelling unit density at least 2.5 times the base density. So it doesn't really say it has to, like, we're thinking development, but the language here doesn't really define development.
Yeah, the issue is if I have a certain footprint, maybe you can call it a non-conforming lot. If I build a affordable housing in Maine, that could just be you're building a modest home that somebody can afford. So if I own that, and I choose to live in that, but I have the scenario that I was explaining to before, I don't want to restrict people, but I also want to adhere to doing the right thing, but I don't want to restrict people from being self-reliant. That's important, I think, for especially Mainers.
Yeah, but the whole purpose of the affordable housing process, right, is to provide homes for folks who have either 80% or 120% of the median income to either rent or purchase a home in our town, which is what we want. We want to encourage that. And not for it to be an investment property, which is what I would look at as a short-term rental to be. I mean, where would those folks go if they don't, if they're trying to rent that home out? Right? That's not,
You're right. And the example of the parking too,
right.
different people have different priorities. Galen mentioned most predominantly it's been shown that only people have one car, but if they like their cars and they have 4 cars, well, we can't stop them from having 4 cars. So.
Right. So, I mean, I think the one we're on now really is on the development piece, and that's what, I mean, it says for affordable housing development approval, approved on or after July 1st, 2023. So this whole affordable housing density is associated with an affordable housing development.
New
and
development.
Not like a single home that's built. And I think in our areas, that's anything more than what, 3 homes is considered a development?
I believe
I think it's 3. If you're gonna build 3 or more,
you have to do a subdivision,
Right.
formal subdivision.
otherwise you
plan.
can wait 5 years and add a home every 5
I think
years.
2 even. If you do 2 at once, it's a subdivision.
Is it? Okay,
You can do 1 every 5 years,
And you're
selling
okay.
off a parcel.
right.
And not go through a subdivision process.
So, but I don't see anything in here talking about setbacks,
Well, we said.
other than the
by-
minimum lot size requirement
We said by default, since they
So-
didn't mention them,
that should apply.
so we should just overtly say,
You
Yeah.
need to follow the setbacks
Setbacks.
requirements of the zone there.
Yeah.
right?
of
Is it-
the growth area.
Well,
Yeah.
growth doesn't have any specific setbacks, right? So it overlies this different zones.
Like the east,
Yeah, so
But
based
what
on
are-
village
What are the
resident.
requirements for multifamily? Are there setbacks and side yards for
There must be.
multifamily?
I think there are different lot sizes in the different zones. I don't have that in front of me. There was,
Yeah, the setbacks are gonna be different for the beach. You know, it may be like 5 feet in relation to where I am, it's probably 20 feet.
right,
yeah,
Because I
but
can
this,
build a building right up to 20 feet from the lot. But when you look at that, you have a property line, you're really talking 40 feet, because there's 20 feet on the other side too, of the other property.
yeah.
But
so,
it's gonna be different, the setback's gonna be different from anybody. You can't, there's no, again, this is probably where the planning board needs to come in, but I don't think you can't violate that. Because then then your neighbor is gonna have a problem with it, and what's stopping them from
Right.
suing the town to say, you're now not adhering to the setback that's in the ordinance.
Right, so
I'm gonna sue you.
yeah, I think, Jim, that it seems like LD 2003 is silent on that. So we should assume that if someone was gonna build an affordable housing development, that they would have to follow the lot area and
well, it's 2.5
or
times.
setbacks.
Yeah, the setbacks.
setbacks associated with
With that.
whatever specific zone they happen to be in within that growth area,
Within the growth area.
okay? And then-
I think, I say we fight that in court all day. Like, they can try to say that we're not adhering, a developer's not saying we're not adhering to it, but we're following setbacks and they're in place.
Right, but every one of these will have to go through the planning board,
Right.
right? And so, I mean, that's where that will be discussed. But because, they're LD 2003 silent on it, there's no reason why we should make any change. I think we stick with what our current setbacks are for the zone, wherever
Right.
they're gonna be building the development.
Yeah,
And
we
if it's
just,
I
crossing, crossing zones, then they make that decision.
yes, we just want
Right.
to add it in, we just want to physically add that into the affordable housing section of our ordinance.
But it may not be necessary if
Yeah.
it's already in, they have to go through a subdivision process,
Right.
which involves the planning board. So whatever the rules are, the rules are.
I think,
You can't make them more
Yeah.
difficult or easier. You can make
Right.
it easier.
No, but I
And I-
think
I don't
it's
think the subdivision gets-
clarification. I
yeah.
think it's just clarification for the language of the ordinance as we go to try to pass this.
well, you
right?
kind of bring up a good point, and I talked about it a little bit at the last meeting, and didn't get any traction on it, was whether or not we should, the path that was being followed was to just adjust different ordinances as needed, right? Or should we have an affordable housing development ordinance?
I think we have to have an affordable
That's
housing.
separate ordinance that then lists some of these requirements, like the definition of affordable housing.
What would it be under otherwise?
Well, it was just.
You're still following the same building codes, and that requires the same setbacks.
Building
Would it be
codes, yes,
redundant?
but I think it should be separate, because
Yeah, well, right now, it's not being
The
approached
problem
that
with
manner.
being separate is you have 900 rules
Yeah,
that apply. I'm just looking at, your curb sizes and your,
Yeah.
so if you say we have to have a separate one for affordable housing, then you have to bring all of that in,
Right.
either directly or by cross-reference, which
right.
Yeah.
any lawyer would shoot you for trying to do that, because nobody could ever follow it.
Right.
Advise against that.
Surprise, surprise.
Lee J actually put it in as 2040-7.15 under affordable housing density.
Right.
Did he?
The headline on that section
Code.
is special considerations or special circumstances. What's that subchapter name?
He made a new one. Oh, this, so 714,
715, right? That's what he made?
so he just put it as 715, which I
Right.
think is
But
new.
all of those in that
240.
area are little
240.
unique sections that there's one or two little rules that
Yeah,
apply.
that's how we should do it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he just added 715, which is for 14.
15.
15? Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. And I don't believe I haven't read the subdivision regs, and that's the planning board's preview.
Right.
I don't think that gets into setbacks. I think they're following the land use ordinance requirements for all that. I think it's
Right.
more about their process of how they work through a subdivision versus technical details like that, which
Right.
would be in the,
Yeah, I just flipping through it and I
Yeah.
don't see it, so then it
yeah.
takes you back to the land use.
Hey, Galen,
Yes.
can I ask you a question? Maybe you can look it up. There's a town that I own a couple cottages in, the town of Phippsburg, and they have in the ordinances that, if you have the lot size available and big enough, you can build a second dwelling. But you can only, in their ordinance, you can only do that every 5 years. And I don't know if that coincides with the ability to do a subdivision, which is the same thing. You gotta wait 5 years before you can, sell off a lot.
You got to
And obviously they may have some other ones for developments, but I'm just wondering if it's worthy to kind of see how this 2003 plays into to an ordinance like that, where
Well,
there may be we have to consider it an affordable housing development in order to make it happen instead of a smaller development.
I guess I thought this was going to be a simple with the affordable housing piece because it's just a density bonus. That's really what this is referring to. For a residential development, which is going to go through the subdivision review process through the planning board, you're just giving them a density bonus for creating this development.
Mhm.
It's no different if it's
So
a, if it's
given all the restrictions then, the setbacks and everything else.
oh, it has to
Sewer,
fo-
septic, everything else.
they still have to follow everything else like any other apartment or any other building that wants to come to your town.
Okay.
2.5 times density.
You saying that, I think we just need the examples of how it applies to our town. And so I want to look at that.
Well, Jim, your zoning tells you what your lot size is and how many, your lot size is 20,000 square feet or 40,000 square feet per dwelling unit. So that's your density, 1 per 20,000 square feet or 1 per 40,000 square feet. And if you come in for an affordable housing bonus, if you meet all the criteria, then instead of 1 per 20, you're going to get 2.5 per 20 square feet, 20,000 square feet. That's the
So half
only,
acre. That's a half an acre. If you look at a perfect square, that's a half an acre.
Right.
So you're saying that, we're not talking the structure, you're not talking 2.5 times, you're not talking the structure, but you're saying,
The density, how many dwelling units can you put on that lot?
Right.
Or, if you have 20 acres and it's 1 per 20,000 square feet, then that's 40 houses. And then you get your density bonus if it was an affordable housing unit. I mean,
Right,
affordable
so-
housing project.
right, so in the 1 acre scenario, excuse me, the half acre scenario, you can have 2.5 structures on that lot. And you'd have to meet the setbacks.
You have to meet the rest of the
Right,
land.
you have to meet the rest of the requirements.
Right.
Lot coverage, all that. Height
Yep.
restrictions, they have to follow everything else the same as
Yeah.
anyone. Yep.
So, yeah, half acre.
Other than
Yeah.
parking.
But Jim,
And-
if you were doing, if you had a vacant piece of property and you wanted to put a number of units in there, you'd go to another section of the ordinance and of LD 23 and try to put 4 units on the lot, and you could put 4 on the lot, which would be more than 2.5, and you could charge whatever you want. You can charge a lot for your rent or sell it off, or you could make it affordable.
Right, you can sell the lot, and that's the subdivision, so you can do that every 5 years.
Well,
Correct.
you can,
You can't sell 4 separate lots. You can't do that. You
unless
can
you
sell
do it,
one.
unless you do a subdivision.
Right, so
Correct.
the subdivision has all those units on it. You can't sell them all separately.
Why can't you?
Yeah, you can.
Subdivision is you're selling a lot, and then you have to wait 5 years if you own more property.
No.
That's,
No.
No,
No.
So a subdivision law says that if you create 3 or more units and you trigger the subdivision, then you have to go through a subdivision a plan approval process. If you get approved by the planning board, you can sell each one of those lots individually. There is a caveat, a carve out in.
But that's a development, right?
That's a subdivision development, yes.
Yes, that's a
But I don't-
subdivision development. Okay.
I don't have to hold on to those lots after I got my approval. I can sell them to you and to Mary Beth and
Correct, all right,
yeah,
right, that's a subdivision development, though.
right.
correct.
Which is what,
That's what,
that's the affordable housing. Affordable housing is a subdivision development.
Right. It's
Right.
not anything other than a subdivision development.
Right,
If you're just wanting to sell one lot and not go through a process, you can do that once every 5 years, and you can do whatever you want with that when it gets sold off.
so the only thing I see with the affordable housing development piece is how we manage the parking. So, right,
And we wanted language in there for no SROs,
that language in there for,
No,
For-
no short-term rental.
no
That's
short-term
right,
rental.
right, no, and, yeah, so we have to figure out how we want to manage the parking. I suggest that we just require that parking all to be within the development. Hopefully that's legal. That it has to be in a growth area only, we should have that stated in ours. That it can't, affordable housing units can't be used for short-term
Right.
rental.
Yeah, they can't apply for short-term rental permits.
They can't apply and they can't do it.
Can't
legally.
apply and can't do it, nope.
And do we need to
so
reference
in
anything
that
else?
example, if I own my own place, I can't do that. If I own one of those affordable houses, I can't do that.
That's correct.
Correct.
So it's a privately owned house,
Or
Right.
rental.
Or rental, but you can't do that.
right? A privately owned affordable housing, and I can't apply for a short-term rental.
Right, because
Right.
of, the public policy reason is you've gotten that property because your income was at a certain level, and then you can't go rent it to Mary Beth, whose income is 3 times yours. And,
I like that example.
because
Where's
she
my
would not
paycheck?
meet the criteria, she's not an eligible person to live in that unit.
Right, but and I'm just throwing this out, if my income somehow changes and I buy a place to live somewhere else, I still own that
No.
property, right?
No,
Well,
no, by law, you
Why?
have to be,
It's private property. I own it.
Well, you could rent it to another
no, I don't think you can.
low income.
Well, affordable housing, I think you might be able to rent.
There's restrictive covenants. Part of the
Yeah.
deal is,
Yeah.
and under the state law, part of the deal is, there are these restrictive covenants for some period of time, 30 years, is that what
30
it is?
years.
Where the income level of a transferee, someone who gets it, you could start, Jim, and earn, $50,000, and then, get really lucky and do really well, and you're earning $150,000 3 years from now. It's fine for you to still own it and to maintain it and to live there forever. But if you ever go to sell it,
Within the 30 years.
within the 30 years, or rent it, because that would be transferring it to your interest in the property, that person has to meet the criteria.
Of an affordable housing person, which is, for renting, is 80% of the median income, or for buying, 120% of the median income.
Right.
So that's the state guidelines for definition of affordable housing applicants.
Which is what we're proposing will be the definition on ours. Right.
So Jim, even though,
In those examples, why is it necessary, if all those restrictions are in place, why is it necessary to put that we don't want it to be a short-term rental? That can't really apply based on those guidelines.
Sure it does. That's, I mean, at least from the spirit of it. The whole idea is for this to be affordable for folks to live in year-round.
And actually live in it.
Yeah, actually live there.
And
But
keep in
in what
mind,
scenario would they,
I would be against proposing it to be affordable housing, I mean, to be used for short-term rental.
Jim, a good example would be under affordable housing developments, the ones I dealt with, it's usually one owner who owns the property. And then they have to have at least 51% of those units for affordable housing, for people that are low to moderate income criteria. And so those 49% could still be rented out market rate. So I don't think it's a bad policy to put that short-term prohibition in. Just to clarify, those other 49% aren't rented out to people who, obviously it wasn't made for that requirement.
but you're referring to renting, not owning, right?
That's what affordable housing developments normally, when they take place in the state with USDA or rural development, they're usually rental because there's a deed covenant on the properties that stipulate that you can't sell the properties or, rent to people that are making a certain threshold of income. So normally for simplicity purposes, they normally have one landlord to manage the property. Whenever I've seen these housing developments go through in Aroostook County. So that's just been my experience.
Okay. So it's 10 after 8, which is a little bit past our witching hour. The last piece, I think I wanted to, or at least not the last piece, one other topic I'd like to talk about on this, and we'll save it for the next time we meet, is that whether 30 years or do we look at something that the trust did, which is 90, or is it something in between? I'm a little concerned that 30 is a bit short, but that's a good point that you've brought up, and you mentioned as well, Mary Beth, right? I mean, at some point, a house is 30 years old, you have to make improvements on. All right, how do you recover your improvements if you have to maintain it as affordable, et cetera? So how does that work out, right?
and it's
How the town can change in 30 years, and maybe,
Yeah.
maybe that's.
it's a lawyer question whether we
Yeah.
could restrict it beyond 30
Well,
years.
Yeah,
I just think, I thought about our conversation from the last meeting, and, we're addressing this, I'll just be really short. We're addressing this because of a point in time, and I'm always very concerned about when, towns and governments step in to address something in a point of time. So I'm the last year of the baby boomers. In 30 years, I'll be 90. The baby boomers will be out of the market in 30 years, and we are the largest population of homeowners right now. So the whole dynamic will change within our town, probably within 10 years, you know? And so I understood what we talked about before, and, you know, but I think we wouldn't really want to come in because there was things done at the state level where there was puts and takes and agreements reached, and I don't think we want to go and extend that beyond 30. I think we get into a danger zone.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, you would be concerned about someone who would come in here and say, okay, great, I'll build it, 30 years, and then I'm turning it over to my kids and they can change, you know, they can take these $250,000 homes and sell them for $1.5 million.
I think in 30 years from now,
As a great investment,
yeah, I think,
quadruple the money.
I
triple the
just
money.
think that if they're going to come in and build affordable housing and solve a problem for the current, then their bonuses in 30 years, they can do something else.
Yeah.
You know, because because affordable housing is not affordable to build for any developer. So I know we keep saying somebody's going to come in and sue us, but I can't figure out who that person's going to be because
I don't
it
either.
is not affordable to build affordable housing for anybody. So, you know, this is, yeah, I'm with Paul in terms of I don't think we can, I understand why we had the conversation. I understand why we would want to think about it, but then I thought about it more and I'm like, gee, you know, there's a lot of dynamics happening in the market and I can't think we could come in and choke this. I get your point,
Yep.
but they did their deed for 30 years. So if somebody's going to come and lay some money on the table, then, you know, in 30 years from now, and a home ages, like Paul said, you know, there's things that happen and you don't want these things not being taken, you don't want the community to go through things that aren't being
Right, but
taken care
I
of.
also don't want to solve a problem for 30 years either, and then have the same problem present itself 60 years from now. Or
There's
30
going to be a
years from now.
huge population that doesn't exist 30 years from now, and they're not going to be in the housing market. And I'm sorry, we can have this argument all night, but there's no population coming up behind us. So, especially in the Northeast, birth rates are,
Well,
But that means that
But-
Kennebunkport, as we know it, is, I mean, obviously it's changing every year,
Good.
but like, would have potentially a very big change in 30
Good.
years from now. Or 30 years from whenever these developments get built in the next few years.
And it may not be the children of the people that are coming in, but, you know, we have a lot of people coming into the country
Yep.
that will be.
Yeah, at some point, we're going to get all that squared away. That if the folks in Washington actually talk to each other and spend time talking about that versus who did what. and-
So I just don't love the
Being juvenile.
concept of,
But,
you know, let's say the affordable
Yeah.
housing that's presumably gonna be built in village parcel.
yeah,
Who knows what's gonna happen to the field across from Consolidated someday, that in 30 years, for 30 years, those could potentially be affordable housing.
after
And
that.
then 30 years after that, they each sell for 5 million?
Yeah, so I think it's,
I don't
think,
wanna live here anymore,
yeah,
if that's
let's-
the case.
I think we got to wrap up because we're extending our time. But I think we ought to think about that as well, because there's certainly some disagreement amongst the board. We ought to think about what that is and have some discussion on that for the next time. Okay?
So I have just a housekeeping question.
Sure.
For the committee. I was told that I have to submit proposed ordinance changes with underlined strike-through format to the town manager by January 5th.
no, we had that meeting, Dan and I had that meeting
Yeah,
with
well,
Lori.
Yeah, the idea was that we would
page.
submit with change, but we were told we can make changes up through not a defined date in February, but in February.
Right, and I think
So-
we gave Lori the heads up that we were going to go after the ADUs because that was easy. And you heard our discussion that we wanted to go deep in the discussion to make sure that we could answer questions and understand impacts. And then Dan had spoken to, you know, in that meeting with Lori and said, you know, our next one would be the affordable housing, because it's the density, as you pointed out, Galen. And so I think we have the caveats there that we want on the affordable side. So I think those two parts of language can be written up so that this committee can look at them and, you know, make sure we get our eyes on them, and then they can go to submit to Lori and the town. But we're going to have to meet again about the 2 to 4
Yep.
housing, because that's a little bit more detailed, and that brings in a whole look and, out of the 5 things I brought up, that brings in the look and feel. That's the biggest impact to look and feel.
Yeah.
So to that thing, we're not sure if, what we gave Lori a heads up is we're not sure that everything, all 3 sections would be ready for June. So we're working to do our best, but at least we can get the first 2 through for June. Does that make sense, Galen?
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Paul,
I make a motion, we adjourn at 8:16.
Second.
any second? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all
Thanks.
for attending.
Thank you.
Do you know